Yo everyone, welcome to my predictions and breakdown of the entire UFC Fight Night Cannonier vs Rodriguez fight card. I'll be starting with the prelims and working my way all the way to the main event. Hope you guys enjoy the video, and if you do, please leave a like, click subscribe, and leave a comment below letting me know. As always, timestamps are in the description and the comment section below if you'd like to skip to any fight in particular. Please watch the whole thing through as well, since I will be putting a lot of fighters on this card into the confident picks list of this video. We're going to be starting with the first fight of the card, which is Julia Avila versus Jacqueline Cavalcanti. First addition to confident picks list in Jacqueline Cavalcanti. I'm not sold on her in terms of becoming a champion in the division. I don't think that will happen, but I do think she wins this fight against Julia Avila. Jacqueline Cavalcanti is also the heavy favorite going into this one. I can understand why. She's been the more active fighter. She's the more technical fighter on the feet. She's the younger fighter by almost 10 years with serious momentum behind her. Julia Avila hasn't been very active, fighting over a year ago, losing to Miesha Tate, and before that, getting a win over 3 years ago against Julia Stolyarenko, I believe it was. I don't like the inactivity. Never like the inactivity, especially as an older fighter in the lower weight classes. Julia Avila is willing to make this fight dirty though, and she seems to not be afraid of the scrappy type of fight, but I just can see this fight being a pretty boring one, with Jacqueline Cavalcanti being able to outpoint Julia Avila. Just by staying at range, pumping the jab non-stop, which she does like to do, I think she'll get off the cleaner shots and win 2 rounds clear in my opinion. Probably a 29-28 decision, with 1 round being more scrappy and maybe going to Julia Avila. So that's my opinion, that's my pick for this fight, and that's the first of many fighters on this card in the confident picks list. We're moving on to Don'Tale Mayes versus Valter Walker. Very quick pick here as well. Although Valter Walker ended up fumbling a close fight against Lucas Bursky, he could have won that fight in my opinion, and I think I remember Lucas Bursky looking super surprised that he won that fight. I still think the guy has the skills to beat a lot of heavyweight fighters in the division with his grappling. A lot of these heavyweight fighters really do lack grappling skill. Only a select few are quite elite grapplers, and I think Valter Walker makes quick work of Don'Tale Mayes by getting him down to the ground and submitting him inside 2 rounds if he uses his grappling. I watched back a few Don'Tale Mayes fights, and I did watch him get taken down and submitted by Rodrigo Nascimento, so pretty confident in Valter Walker being able to take him down. Don'Tale will be the better fighter on the feet, and Valter Walker even has a chance to finish him on the feet too, so I'm pretty confident in this pick, guys. I'll just be annoyed if another UFC fighter who has pretty decent grappling in the UFC does not choose to use it when they could have in a fight. Happens a lot more than you think, guys. Happened in the last card. Confident picks list edition in Valter Walker. Moving on to Vince Morales versus Elijah Smith. This is a great matchup here. Both guys aren't afraid to engage on the feet, but Elijah Smith has really shown a great wrestling game. I watched his fight on the Contender Series against Aaron Tao, I believe it was. Very impressive entries on his takedowns, shoots for both singles and doubles, and at times, they're very well implemented with his boxing included. Elijah tends to stay at range, but does look to pressure in sometimes, mostly to be able to look for the timing on the entries of his takedowns and get this fight to the ground. Vince Morales usually is a front foot type of fighter, pressures forward, can fire multiple punch combinations. One key thing I like to highlight for Morales, though, is that he generally looks quite good from start to finish over 3 rounds. He doesn't slow down. He keeps quite solid hand speed, foot speed, and generally a higher output than most fighters I've seen. That's where this fight can take a turn if Morales pressures Elijah early. The only thing is that I don't believe he'll be able to stuff all of Elijah's takedown attempts, which I believe and I hope he would use in this fight against Morales, because it'll be a major weapon for him to control this fight and to take the first 2 rounds into the bank. Elijah is the pick for this fight. Like I mentioned already, I think he wrestles Morales in this fight, gets solid ground control time, wins the first 2 rounds most likely, but there is a chance that he slows down enough to let Morales pick it up in the 3rd round. I think the fight goes the distance. Morales takes the 3rd round with his cardio solid pace, but loses the first 2 rounds against Elijah Smith's explosiveness and wrestling top control. That's the pick. Moving on to Gabriel Bonfim versus Khaos Williams. This is an absolute banger of a matchup. Some very underrated fights on this card. A bit of info for you guys on both fighters. Khaos Williams is a predominant striker. If you haven't seen him already, don't think he'll do anything but strike in this matchup. He does clinch against the cage sometimes and does try to get takedowns against fighters that aren't the greatest wrestlers or greatest grapplers. He's got a lot of power. He's got crisp boxing. And did I mention he's got a lot of power, guys? He carries a devastating knockout ability through 3 entire rounds. He doesn't tend to slow down that much in his fights. Very solid stand-up fighter overall, but he can be a little bit one-dimensional when versing more technical strikers, like in his matchup with Randy Brown. Although he even managed to clip Randy Brown a couple times in that fight, Khaos Williams also tends to take a few decent shots himself in some of these fights, which makes me feel that he lacks more so in the defensive boxing department. Gabriel Bonfim is solid everywhere, but looks to be explosive within the first 2 rounds to try to get this fight to the ground. He is nasty with his submissions and can latch up one very quickly given the opportunity, as seen in his submission win over Trevin Giles, where he immediately jumped the guillotine and won that fight. I'm pretty confident in Gabriel's ability to get this fight to the ground, but there isn't that much tape on Khaos Williams' takedown defense and ground game in the UFC, since he is usually able to keep the fight standing for the most part, has quite good takedown defense, and also seems to have a lot more opponents who are game to stand and strike with him. Michel Pereira, though, was one of the only fighters I saw who consistently went for takedowns in the later rounds of his fight with Khaos Williams, and he was able to secure a couple in the 3rd round. Gabriel Bonfim is a way better grappler than Michel Pereira, in my opinion, and should be able to control Khaos Williams on the ground for the majority of this fight. And in my head, I think he finds the submission as well. I'm putting Gabriel Bonfim into my confident picks list, and man, I can tell there are going to be quite a few confident picks for me on this card. They all can't win, right? There's no way. Surely not. I hope they do, for everyone's sake, of course, and my sake. Moving on to Rafael Estevam versus Jesus Aguilar. Guys, look at the confident picks list. He's already in there. This is bad if all these guys get smashed. I'm gonna look like an absolute buffoon if all these go the other way, but Rafael Estevam is an extremely talented pressure grappler. He's very explosive. He's always looking to take his opponents to the ground, and he always tends to opt for some high volume ground and pound to try to finish the fight. The only gripe I have with the dude is that if his opponents survive the 1st and 2nd round, he tends to slow down dramatically going into the 3rd. It's very understandable because of the pace he sets with his grappling, but it's bad news against a lot of dudes with great striking and heavy hands. He almost lost his fight with Jose Johnson because of gassing out in the 3rd round. Jose Johnson was literally able to put a beat down on him, do whatever he wanted to him in the 3rd round of that fight because of it. And that's the only real downside of his game. Jesus Aguilar, on the other hand, solid grappler and wrestler too, but predominant striker, has an extremely solid guillotine. I think he's gotten at least 7 or 8 guillotine finishes so far, so you know it's a submission he's looking to snatch up as soon as Rafael Estevam shoots a takedown. Powerful dude as well, can knock you out with one punch, and at flyweight, that's very impressive. Now you're probably wondering though, why Larry? Why do you have Rafael Estevam in your confident picks list if Jesus Aguilar seems pretty good, pretty decent? I'll tell you why, and it's mostly because I have seen great grapplers in the division put the pressure on Jesus and be able to get a solid amount of control time over him whilst avoiding the guillotine. So Tatsuro Taira comes to mind, who got a submission win in the 1st round over Aguilar, and even Mateus Mendonça absolutely controlled Aguilar on the ground in their fight, getting several minutes of control time over him, multiple submission attempts as well with solid ground and pound. I just think Rafael is better than Mendonça at grappling, and maybe not as good as Tatsuro Taira, but I think he's solid enough to where I feel confident in him being able to outwork Aguilar on the ground and get this win either by submission or decision. That's my reasoning and that's my pick. We move on to Jared Gordon versus Mashrabjon Ruziboev. My boy Jared Gordon, guys. I've watched this guy lose quite a few robbery decisions, and I actually think he's quite decent of a UFC fighter. I really think he's underrated. I think I was going to pick him to beat his last opponent as well in Caio Fernandez before Fernandez withdrew. But man, have they matched him up on short notice against an absolute beast of a prospect. UFC debuter Ruziboev is an absolute finisher to say the least. He's got 20 wins, 12 by KO, and 5 by submission. So you know he will be hunting for this one, hunting for the finish against Jared Gordon. But there's a few things about Ruziboev is that He's opening as quite a big underdog in this fight, which is understandable to a degree, since this is on less than a week's notice and he is dropping from 170 to 155. Might be a bit of a hard weight cut, and he might have weight cutting issues going into this fight. Also, he hasn't fought for around a year and a half, so we'll have to see how he does being out of the octagon for that amount of time. If this was a full camp for both guys, full preparation, I wouldn't even mind taking Ruziboev as an underdog, but Jared Gordon has had a camp for this fight. I just think you have to be somewhat good as well, somewhat really good, to beat Jared Gordon too. Nasrat Haqparast didn't even beat Jared Gordon in his most recent loss. Like, this guy just keeps getting robbed of decisions more than any other fighter I have seen. So I'm going to stick with my original pick and go Gordon to get this one done, but wouldn't be surprised to see a finish from Ruziboev, a crazy knockout, if he comes out looking very good. Moving on to Angela Hill versus Ketlen Souza. This is a close fight, guys. I've been going back and forth on who I'm picking. I originally decided on Angela Hill, and I've been thinking about who to edge this fight to since the odds were so close. Angela Hill usually is pretty tricky for a lot of these girls that haven't had too many wins inside the UFC. She tends to use her craftiness and overall veteran fight IQ and skill to take her through to the decision win, but she also has a lot of decision losses, and that needs to be said. 14 losses on her record. She can be beat, and in her last fight against Tabitha Ricci, she did not look very good. She looked quite slow, but I can understand her looking a little flat or tired since Tabitha was trying to put a pace on her in that fight. I'll be honest, guys, I don't know how to justify this pick more than this last little bit of information I've got for you here. Ketlen Souza is 29 years old, whilst Angela Hill is 40 years of age. Ketlen Souza will be the more physical and powerful fighter of the two in the octagon, and will most likely win some grappling exchanges due to her explosiveness advantage and the power advantage. Her striking is decent, but it's powerful, and her grappling game is decent as well. I really think this fight will go to the distance again, so might put something on that, but we'll need to check the odds for that to see if it's worth it. And I think that Ketlen Souza will be able to do more damage in this fight and be able to not be out-grappled to an extreme that would cause her to lose this fight versus Angela Hill. That's my opinion. Ketlen Souza is the pick. Moving on to the main card. Conor Matthews versus Jose Delgado, and I'm just going to come out and say it very quickly, guys. I like Jose Delgado's game. He's very dangerous on the feet, but is good with some submissions as well. Mixes in the takedowns and everything. The guy is the full package. Honestly, I don't think that Conor Matthews is better than Jose Delgado in almost any realm of the MMA game. They're probably closer in the grappling skill, but striking technique, power, defense, offense, and overall striking skills, I gotta go with Jose Delgado all day. I can see Jose getting a KO win in this fight, and that's what I'm going to say for my prediction. He does get hit a little bit since he likes to put pressure on his opponents and can be a bit overeager at times, but he has a pretty solid chin, and I think Conor Matthews' striking and defense isn't the best, along with him being a little chinny in my opinion. So Jose Delgado is the pick, most likely by KO as well. Moving on to Rodolfo Vieira versus Andre Petroski. Close matchup here, and I feel like there are two clear storylines for how I might see this fight going. Will Andre Petroski be able to use his superior wrestling to stack up control time and get this win over Rodolfo Vieira without getting caught in a submission, most likely by a decision win? Or will Rodolfo Vieira, with his superior BJJ game, be able to catch Petroski in some sort of submission during the grappling exchanges? Those are the main storylines I see here. Other things to consider, though, is that, to be blunt here, both guys aren't the greatest strikers, but Andre Petroski in particular is the worst out of the two, and it's a significant difference to highlight. Rodolfo Vieira also does have solid power in his hands, which could come in handy in this fight if they both decide to have a stand-up fight and not engage in each other's grappling. I just don't like the fact that Vieira is a moderate favorite, because in my opinion, this fight is a pick'em still, with maybe a slight edge to Vieira. So it's making me want to pick the underdog, since I like picking underdogs when I think I could get some decent odds on them. But I do think Vieira wins this fight the majority of the time, and I think that is the pick I will be committing to for this fight. So Rodolfo Vieira is the pick. Moving on to Ismael Bonfim versus Nazim Sadykhov. This is the other Bonfim brother on the card in Ismael Bonfim, now fighting Nazim Sadykhov. Honestly, both these Bonfim brothers are insane, and I believe personally can be easily ranked in their divisions. Both have skills in both striking and grappling to take them far in the sport. Ismael Bonfim, though, I personally think is the more dominant of the two brothers to watch. He has a super exciting style, very good in the stand-up, slips very well, has great counters, powerful puncher, explosive grappling. Hard to beat a guy like that. Only Benoit Saint-Denis was able to do it, and that was after putting on his best performance, in my opinion, and an absolute relentless pace in the first round. Ismael Bonfim had his moments as well in that fight. Great shots thrown in that fight, great knees in the clinch, but that high-pressure, high-pace type of fighter is a hard matchup for him, in my opinion. As for his opponent in Nazim Sadykhov, insanely talented fighter as well, similar to the Bonfim brothers, could be ranked in the division right now. That's how technical and good he is overall in the fight game. Both fight very similarly. I'd give the cardio and sharpness in striking technique edge to Nazim Sadykhov, but I'd give the power, the explosiveness, the defensive, offensive boxing counter ability to Ismael Bonfim. Bonfim is very good at dishing out big punishment whilst avoiding the big punches himself. This fight will be a battle, make no mistake. I think this fight will also be a fight that will be high-paced, and I do worry about Ismael Bonfim in that circumstance because I favor Sadykhov if the fight gets a third round. The only thing, though, is that both guys like to implement their grappling in fights, but Nazim Sadykhov, in my opinion, has the better wrestling game and a better ability to bring this to the ground, whereas Bonfim's grappling seems to rely a lot on his physicality. So this makes this fight extremely close to pick, in my opinion. I am slightly leaning towards Ismael Bonfim because I don't see a crazy submission threat from Nazim Sadykhov, and this is because of all the tape that I've watched. You know how you watch a lot of fighters fight, like grapplers in this specific scenario, and you watch them wrestle someone to the ground, but you don't see them trying for too many submission attempts? Like, they're trying to get a dominant position, but mostly to open up some avenues for ground and pound or just to get control time with their superior wrestling, just try to smudge them a little bit. That's how it feels when I watch Sadykhov. I think he's a solid grappler with fantastic striking, but I don't see a massive submission threat against Bonfim in this fight. But I could see him potentially controlling him for 2 rounds of this fight. This is going to be super tough. I think this fight goes the distance most likely. High-paced fight, close fight. But I can see Ismael Bonfim edging out a close decision win after winning the first and second round with his striking, losing the third round due to his lower cardio and getting controlled in the fight. That's what I'm imagining in my head, but we will only know after this weekend. Ismael Bonfim is the pick. Moving on to Edmen Shahbazyan versus Dylan Budka. Now, I debated picking Dylan Budka off the rip, and that's only because I've watched Edmen Shahbazyan be doing good things in his fights, but just finding a way to lose. The best example of this was in his last bout with Gerald Meerschaert, where he was just beating on Gerald Meerschaert for a lot of that fight, rocked him bad, was ground and pounding him a lot in the second round, and was looking like he was going to get the finish in that fight, and then all of a sudden he's getting arm triangled by GM3. It's super disappointing, because I think this pick should be somewhat reliable, but I do worry about the grappling of Dylan Budka, and he's got pretty solid power in his hands as well. I just think that when Edmen Shahbazyan is on point, he's got good sprawls, he's quite technical in the stand-up, and he's not afraid to throw quite a bit of volume in the striking, and I like activity in a lot of fighters because it makes me feel more confident in their ability to edge out rounds on the judges' scorecard, especially since watching Dylan Budka, although he's decent on the feet, he hasn't got the volume that Shahbazyan has. That's the major difference I'm going to go with this pick. Odds shouldn't be that far apart, but I will be going with the favorite in Edmen Shahbazyan to win this fight, but it's very sketchy. I'll check the odds on Budka closer to the fight, might end up putting something on that later. Moving on to the co-main event, Cavalcanti versus Youssef Zalal. This is a sick matchup, sick fight. Youssef Zalal has been on quite the tear recently after coming back to the UFC in 2024, getting 3 wins, all by submission. Very impressive ground game, very impressive overall game from Youssef Zalal. He does really have some pretty solid kickboxing. I do think Cavalcanti does have the more well-rounded stand-up game and is the better pure boxer as well, but he is on quite a bit of a skid, losing 4 out of his last 5. I honestly only count 3 losses because I thought the Josh Emmett loss was a win, so I will include that as a win in my line of thinking. It ain't looking the best for Cavalcanti though at this point in his career. Almost 37 in the featherweight division, has been in quite a few wars, taken a lot of damage, has had injuries and surgeries, and in my opinion, has looked a lot stiffer since he had his last ACL surgery. I think versing a good grappler in Youssef Zalal, who will be looking to take him down and submit him, it's probably one of the worst matchups he could have drawn, especially after seeing what Aljo was able to do to him. Granted, though, that Aljo is a fantastic grappler, in probably one of the top 3 grapplers in the division, but I do believe that Youssef Zalal is good enough to do the same thing to Cavalcanti, potentially get a finish in this fight as well. I'm picking Youssef Zalal to get this one done. Confident picks list edition as well. Could potentially get a submission in this fight. Odds are about right. Moving on to the main event of the evening, Jared Cannonier versus Gregory Rodriguez. Man, jumping into this main event, I'll say a few things. You guys voted on the poll, and at the time of making this video, the poll is dead even. So I'll give you guys a bit more time to vote until the day before the card, and I'll record the final poll votes for the recap video I will make on the card after it's done. So regardless of that though, I like this matchup, but I do just feel sad for Cannonier. He was on the verge of another title shot when he was fighting Amavov, and then he got TKO'd in that fight, but not really, since the referee stepped in way too early, and he probably should have given him more time to recover. But moving on from that now, he even fought Caio Borralho, who put an absolute beatdown on him in some of the rounds, and he ended up absorbing so much damage in that fight. It wasn't even funny. And now he's fighting down the rankings and fighting another extremely dangerous dude in Gregory Rodriguez, who is relatively young. He's got momentum. He's dangerous on the ground and on the feet. He's a powerful guy overall as well. Cannonier just can't catch a break, in my opinion. But the things Cannonier does have that will aid him in this fight is solid takedown defense and solid boxing and striking technique. He's probably the more technical and solid striker out of the two, in my opinion, but he doesn't have the same amount of finish potential as a Gregory Rodriguez, and he doesn't have a similar amount of power at his current age of 40 years old. I'm not going to say Jared isn't powerful though, but he isn't finishing too many people by TKO in recent years, besides like a Derek Brunson, who's the last person I can remember him TKOing. I could see him chinning Gregory Rodriguez though, and that's because of his superior boxing game, and Gregory Rodriguez does have a little bit of a lax defensive striking game when he's closing the distance. But I can also see Gregory Rodriguez mixing in more takedowns, trying to use his BJJ to his advantage against a dangerous opponent here. Many things make me lean towards Gregory Rodriguez in this fight, and I think that's who I'm going to commit to picking for this card. Won't be adding it to my confident picks list because I do think this is still relatively close, but I do think he gets this one done, most likely by finish as well. He's a very dangerous dude. So that wraps up my UFC Fight Night Cannonier vs Rodriguez full card predictions and breakdown. I hope you guys found this breakdown helpful for making your own picks for fights. Let me know if you agree or disagree with them in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to catch all my future predictions and other MMA content I have been making recently. Make sure to vote in the polls for who you guys think will win this weekend, Cannonier vs Rodriguez. You've got time before the day of the card. I will include the finalized poll from now on in my recap videos for the cards, like I mentioned earlier, so you guys can see who you picked. I also have put up the poll for the next UFC main event, UFC Fight Night, Cejudo versus Song. Make sure to vote on that one too. So thanks for watching, and see you guys next time.